morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Andrews with Business of Child Care. As our audience is coming into the room, excited to welcome you to the last of our 2025 summer series from Business of Child Care. We're excited to have you joining us here, the fourth in a series of great events through the summer, starting with focus on one provider, a localized strategy with Barb Wagner. We had Sally Rutledge-Ott talking about nonprofit governance and the importance of organizational structure as it relates to both communities and child care centers. And just last week had the team from Tutris on board to talk about the infrastructure to support child care initiatives. A great conversation. All of those are available on our YouTube channel, and I encourage you to engage with those. As we get started today, we're going to have a great topic. We're going to have a great conversation and really focused on the missed economic opportunity without childcare. And Chad Chancellor is joining us from Next Move Group. We're excited to have, or I'm excited to have him join me today to walk through this conversation, and I'll have him introduce himself in just a minute. I was last week down in Springfield, Illinois, excited to deliver the closing keynote for the Midwest CDI conference, and really talking about through that session, that address for success, right? Understanding where it is we're going before we start going there. And we'll weave that in that conversation today and really talk about, from an economic development perspective, why now is the time, if not already, to make sure childcare is on your scorecard of opportunities to keep in mind. A brief introduction about Business of Childcare. Our mission is to guide childcare businesses and the communities they serve to better outcomes. A lot of great impacts over nearly 5 years, based out of Minnesota, with work extending throughout the country. Active projects right now in North Carolina, Illinois, South Dakota, Minnesota, and others. Our main foundation, and right a line for our audience today, is this idea that with childcare, we create wage realization opportunity, and kind of a few big words there, but simply put, without childcare, people are not able to pursue their career and work, or maybe the education that leads them to that career work. And we know when that limitation exists, we break down workforce, we break down economic growth, and ultimately, as both Chad and I see in communities around the country, we start to downturn our community well-being. And so it's a big topic for a lot of different reasons, a very complex one, but certainly as a foundation for this audience, certain to resonate. And we think about our work really bringing in the whole community. We realize that just like any initiative in many of our communities that have been undertaken and achieved, it really required everybody to come to the table. And when we think about childcare, we think about our work with communities. We help communities understand that centering the childcare community, at least for this exercise, helps us start to really realize the benefits that all of the different entities that make up our community realize when there's childcare, right? Our workforce, an obvious topic today, maybe an even more obvious one, school readiness and preparation for that K-12 experience. And even broadly as a community, we have police chiefs, public safety officials chiming in on the fact that even in some communities, middle schoolers happen to be running Main Street as an after-school activity. So a lot of opportunities for us to see our connections and our opportunities to benefit even more so by coming together. And when we meet with communities, we meet them at one of three stages of readiness. Really pretty straightforward, right? Understanding impact, understanding what the potential opportunity forward is, or maybe the opportunity being missed. Once we have that grounding, and Chad and his team do a great job helping connect the data dots and helping understand the correlations and connections, now you're primed to develop a plan. Coming back to last Thursday, you got to have that address for success, and you got to have an understanding of where is it that you're trying to go. And our approach, help communities build momentum early. Understanding momentum brings greater resources, greater contributions as success starts to unfold. And that's really what's going to happen, right? In stage 3, activating a plan, taking action, getting off the start line, and starting to make a real change and improvement to the way that childcare is functioning, that ecosystem is functioning in your community. And our big highlight from 2024, amongst others, Moultrie County, Illinois, running the full program started by several years ago, understanding impact, getting themselves organized. Our work helped them through stage 2, developing a plan and just wrapping up the execution of all of that work just this past year. Great outcomes, right? Great outcomes on retention, retaining. One of our biggest issues beyond building is keeping those that have been doing this great work feeling successful, feeling sustainable, and still in pursuit of their dreams and goals as well. So a lot of opportunities for communities to get started where they're at, a lot of opportunities for communities to think about this differently. And that's really what today's conversation is about. When we think about the interconnectivity of things, we think about some of the high-level conversations we know are ongoing with communities and site selectors and all of those different folks. I thought, what a better a guest to welcome on to our summer series finale wrap up, but Chad Chancellor from Next Move Group. I'm gonna give a minute here for Chad to introduce himself and talk a little bit, and then we'll jump into our conversation of the day of how to figure out this better for our economic development opportunities. Chad, welcome. Glad you're here. Let the audience know a little bit about you and the work you're leading.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. So I founded Next Move Group with a co-founder in 2014. So we've been in business 11 years now, and our mission is to help small to mid-sized communities and small to mid-sized companies grow together. And so historically, up until the last 2 or 3 years, we did that by way of doing site selection for manufacturers. Matter of fact, since I've been talking to you, a manufacturer in Minnesota has emailed me, wondering if we can help them find where to put a location. Just while I've been talking to you. We've also done executive searches where we help communities go out and hire economic development directors. We're doing one right now in Muncie, Indiana for the regional partnership over there. To give you an idea of the sense of our client, we really prefer the small to mid-sized communities. And then we've done various strategic plans and marketing and even board trainings. I heard you talk about you all had a governance session last week. I'm doing a board training tomorrow, Thursday, whatever they did, for the University of West Alabama, where we go over governance of nonprofits. So that was historically what we did. And I guess it was 3 years ago, we were doing a site selection project for a battery manufacturer. And they told us as part of our process, they wanted us to score whether or not communities had enough child care seats and housing as well. We can talk about that as a side note. This was a little eye-opening to me because historically we score communities for manufacturing projects based on the size of the industrial park. Does it have wetlands? How big is it? Can we add to it? How big's the water line, the sewer line? This particular company looked at child care as infrastructure. I mean, that's what they told me. And so light bulb kind of went off in my mind, and I told our team, I said, we need to start helping communities figure out how many child care seats they're short. Now, I want you to understand, we didn't know how to fix the problem. I still don't know that we know how to fix it. You probably know that, but we can tell them you're 1,000 seats short or whatever. And we tie it straight to economic development. We just did a child care study near Kansas City. I'm not going to say the name of the town, but we were able to show that parents who had 2 kids were only in the workforce 44% of the time. If they had 1 kid, they were in the workforce 75%, which is super high labor force participation rate. The minute they had 2 kids, it went to 44% because they simply did not have childcare. It was too expensive. So if they create the childcare, they're going to add possible employees for the industry. So that's kind of how we got into it. I was an economic developer for years. I was raised in small Mississippi town, 900 people. So, wherever you're from is probably big compared to me. That's why we go after small to mid-size. And when I was a kid, my dad worked at a blanket factory and it got offshore overnight. 600 jobs left town. And so I was 12 or 13. I was raised in a single family home, not because of divorce. For my dad to make a decent living, he got construction work. So he would leave home every Sunday night and come home on Friday. That was my life, and so I got interested in economic development, and we built this company in order to do that. And I don't have any kids. So some people would say, Chad, why are you doing childcare? You single, you don't have any kids. I don't, because of the demand. because of the man. For you to keep that blanket factory that my dad got laid off in, for you to recruit a new one, you're going to have it, or the industry's going to put it in themselves. That's one of the things they're doing. And so I now believe it's just as much infrastructure as the water line, the electric line, so on and so forth. And so I'm thankful one of our team members found you, because we can do the demographic study to show how many you need, but we don't know how to fix it. I've got some thoughts on it, but I think you're smarter at that than me. So I think hopefully this will make a good combination, and I'm tickled that you've invited me on.
Well, we're excited to have you too. And again, what you're really stating as that beginning punchline, as it were, is the cost of waiting is measurable. Right, just
Oh
like
yes.
as you and I have talked, some of the other amenities that we as communities work to attract that make us attractive, we can now start to really articulate in many ways when childcare isn't in place, what it's costing, right? That site selector, that company that skips over option A because they show up in town and amongst maybe other things, no childcare for their 200 employee plant. So I think more and more, and you certainly have noted it too, that cost is measurable, and we see sometimes how this plays out, right? I think you see this closer. You already highlighted the scoreboard or scorecard impact, right? The fact that just as a general rule now, childcare is getting put on that list. As you think about delayed projects or even challenges because they don't have the staff for their own business, you talked about the workforce dropout. Any other thoughts around some of the signals that you or communities you're working with help identify that gives them the sign, as it were, that maybe childcare is something to consider?
Yes, well, so we do various demographic studies where we can chart the population of childbearing mothers age by age group. We can populate how many child they have. Nationwide, the household size is going down. So we have done it in a few locations to where they have less demand than ever, but the supply's dried up. It's all supply and demand. Even if they got less demand, the one facility they had closed down, so they have nothing. And so, but you can pretty much chart it by your labor force participation rate amongst people with children. It's most often thought of as the mother, but sometimes it's the father. And so, if you just chart parents with children workforce participation rate, and if you can look at that now versus before COVID, you take right now whatever's the latest data set you have and compare it to 2018, and you will be stunned. I'd be shocked if you're not stunned. And our target small to mid-sized companies, communities, but I spoke at a Florida chamber event about a year ago, and this is the number one issue in Florida. And I'm not talking just a small town. Tampa, Miami, Orlando, they don't have it. So this is a nationwide issue, which tells me the community that solves this is going to have the upper hand in landing the next big project, whether it's a data center, a manufacturer, whatever the case may be. They're going to have a upper hand. I often tell people most site selection projects I've done don't go to what I call the best site. Now they don't ever go to the worst, but a lot of times they go to what, in my honest opinion, is the third or fourth best site. They typically don't go to the one that's giving them the most incentives. They don't go to the worst, but usually it's the top two or three. I
Right.
find things like this is what attracts them. If you have the child care, if you have the housing, and if you don't have it, if you at least show them you have a plan to get it, then I think you're going to be able to beat a lot of your competition, for the projects that you want. But yes, if you track the demographics of parents with one or two kids that are still in the labor force, you can see it go down. That'll show you how many folks you're missing that could make good workers for your industries.
Well, and again, the real takeaway from this element is right what it says, right? Is your opportunities are limited as those that don't have a road to town. And when we think about, and you're highlighting that point, when we build new housing developments and we have new industry coming, or even the industrial park, the first thing on the top of everybody's list is just what you said earlier. Where's the water coming from? Where's the power coming from? Where are the roads coming from? And I just had a conversation with a chamber leader in North Texas here in the last couple of months, and talked about 400 to 600 housing units designated primarily for families. And the primary question was, where's the kids going to go? And so I think it's an interesting movement, if we might think about it, and helping communities think about this as a different, a little bit different reality. So as we think about that shift in thinking, Chad, we also think about then, in some ways, really maybe framing that burden differently, right? From a private burden to a public advantage, and some of the things that certainly we hear in our conversation, helping guide communities to better outcomes, is they've made that connection. And they've talked about it differently than maybe they have before. One example, community we're working with right now, the mayor said, listen, we're buying a fire truck. Why? We need a fire truck. Why? Because that gives us fire protection. Talk about childcare in that same analogy, the protection against the community and its vitality, and where you're seeing those that you have been working with really make that leap, if it were of faith, over to, yep, we should really position this just like all of those other key infrastructure items.
Sure. And we've been doing child care studies now for, I guess, 2 years. And I'm probably the best person in the world to talk about this because I don't have any kids. So can't anybody say, "Oh, Chad's out for Chad," because I'm not. I mean, it is a labor force participation rate issue. And I saw yesterday or one day the stocks were all down because they were less labor force participants, from a national standpoint. But if you just think about that locally. But yes, I'm seeing chambers of commerce and economic development organizations particularly get involved in trying to solve the problem. I'm not sure it's a one size fits all, but I can take you Clarksville, Tennessee. Is a town about 45 minutes an hour north of Nashville. They have had tremendous success in a 3,000-acre industrial park. They have landed major companies in a 3,000-acre industrial park. They just built a child care facility in the industrial park. If I remember, it's 800 to 1,000 slots. Oh, good. You're going to bring it up. If I remember, okay, 800 slots. Uh, if an industry locates in this industrial park, they get first dibs for their employees being able to use it. Looks like they get 400 discounted slots. Clarksville is also a military town, and so they also have that availability there. They use public and private dollars to fund it. I don't know. I remember when they announced they were doing it 3 or 4 years ago, so I have forgotten some of the details. But if I remember, like the community industrial board is going to own the facility, and then they go out and solicit potential people to run it and operate it. Texarkana, Arkansas has done that. If you go to Texarkana, Arkansas's industrial park, you will see their child care facility just like their other infrastructure. We got an 8-inch water line. We got 10 megawatts of power. We got a child care facility. One of the tribes in Oklahoma, if I remember, I read, is putting in a 1,200 person one. And so a lot of community, Joe Max Higgins, who I think is one of the best economic developers in the country, 60 Minutes literally did a story on him. He's in Columbus, Mississippi. They have landed things like Airbus helicopters. He told me that he's building one. I don't know if it's announced. I believe he's announced that he's going to build one. And so, but I don't know that just brick and mortar, that's expensive. I don't know that everybody needs to run out and do that, but I'm seeing that. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can think of 5 or 10 that are doing that. I'm seeing other places try to affect it by way of various tax incentives, either to the developer themselves or the operator, or to industries if their workers use the child care facility. And so I'm seeing a lot of creative ways to do it. I know one community had an old school that they're trying to retrofit. So anything you can do to help the child care provider be profitable. None of these are making a whole boatload of money. So if you give them incentives, nobody in town needs to, run around and holler, "Oh, we're giving them all this money." They're fighting to get by. So you for sure better help the ones you still got survive, and then if you can help them add or whatever, you need to do that too. But yes, I'm seeing multiple communities that have been highly successful, literally building the facilities themselves, and then that's probably the tier A, and then I've seen all kind of other stuff as you work down the funnel.
Yeah, and we'll talk
And,
about
and
some
I
more
think they're
examples.
floating. I think they're floating bonds to do it, Jeff, just like you would float industrial bonds to finance the industrial park. I mean, I think that's what they're doing for these.
Well, and what you're really highlighting, right, is that evolution in economic development thinking, right? The old view, and I might even extend this to just general community thinking, right? The old view is a family issue, right? It's a private cost burden. We hear from all sorts of communities about, in a day before that wasn't an issue. And I think what you're highlighting is these small midtown communities are realizing holding on maybe to that approach may not be the best as far as aligning to today's economic development approach, right? That new view, really thinking about it as competitive, thinking about it as, I think you just mentioned it, integral to the strategy, right? Even as a
100%. I got in this business in 2004. I was an economic developer before I started my company in Fort Payne. And when I got in it, it was all let's prepare an industrial site and let's recruit a manufacturer. Now, in any given day, I can be talking childcare, I can be talking senior living, I can be talking, do we have enough electricity for all these data centers? I can be talking about different stuff. And so, but I think this is the greatest time ever to do economic development in a small to mid-sized town. Ever. Because with the internet, you can get your word out there. 20 years ago, uh, I use Jackson, Mississippi as an example. I'm from Mississippi. I'm not from Jackson, but I'm from Mississippi. Jackson's our state capital. Nearly every state has a Jackson. Tennessee's got a Jackson. Alabama's got a Jackson. Michigan's got a Jackson. So how does Jackson just be known as the Jackson? With all the other, nearly impossible before the internet. Now with YouTube and all the podcasts and so forth, you can do it. So I think the communities that figure this out, because I'm convinced more than ever that industries want to be in small to mid-sized towns. They'd rather be there than the metro area. I'm convinced of that. So I think the towns that figure this whole community development piece out are going to land the industry. This is the new incentive. This is what free land used to be. Industries will pay for the land if you solve this problem. And so I think that in some ways we have to retrain ourselves, including myself, because I'm an old-fashioned industrial recruiter. We have to almost retrain ourselves from taking this bucket of money over here that we used incentives for, maybe to give them a site or prepare the site, maybe sell them the site, but put that money over here in a child care. I think we really got to be creative in our thinking. And I think the towns that are going to win. And let me tell you this, you can't just rely on your state to solve it. States have great intentions, but if they solve it, they're going to solve it for everybody. You're not going to have an advantage over the town next door. I mean, really, you need state assistance big time, but you got to have something creative your own self so you can, compete against the ones next door.
Well, and that's just it. I think there's that opportunity that sometimes with childcare, we lose sight of the fact that whether nonprofit, for profit, or somewhere in between, it's still an ongoing business concern. It still contributes to our overall community and our overall maybe even relevance. We might say as the word. I know in my experience working with a lot of communities where we start on the topic of childcare, right? Maybe even they have some understanding of that impact. When we get into that planning, I think this is where, again, the work is so important. And the reason we want the whole community around is that everybody in this arc buys, so to speak, for a different reason. And so it's also, I think, important to help highlight the fact that, a mom or dad or parent that's gainfully employed and doing well might have a little more time to read to little Bobby or Susie at night, right? Or might have the ability to not be so stressed out on how rent's going to be made and some of these other things. So when we look at that, I brought this slide back up again because I think it's also realizing that our value proposition, our message to any one of those beneficiaries of childcare also is different. Right, to your point, what you highlight often is the lens of the economic developer in that moment is to drive opportunity for the community, right? As a basic punchline, build sustainability and viability. And so incorporating this as just as standard as the roads and the water, like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
positions you to think about a little bit differently. We already highlighted a little bit of the Clark. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say two things. One, we do a conference in New Orleans where we have various big site selectors come. I believe you're coming to speak because childcare is such a
I'm
big deal.
excited.
It'll be next February. Uh, one of the site selectors come and told me he's doing a project in Georgia. And the industry, I don't know who they are. He didn't tell me that. I don't know what kind of industry they are. They are building their own housing and their own childcare facility. Now, in the 50s, when these garment manufacturers would show up in the South, they would build their own housing. I swear to you. I know you're from Minnesota. I don't know if they did it up there or not. You come to the South, and I can drive you to all these towns, and you'll see a bunch of little houses that look just alike. Because what happened as the garment manufacturing came to the South, they built their own housing. 70 years later, we're doing that again, apparently, what he told me in Georgia, and they're building their own child care. And secondly, we represented a call center. We don't represent them anymore. It's been years. But when we first started our company, so 2014, 2015, we represented a call center. Back then, they were paying like $7 an hour. I think now a lot of this is done from home after COVID, but they would do childcare in their call center, and I remember thinking at the time they were crazy because it was headache and added cost. But what happened is the people working there, at break would run down, visit with their kid, made them happier. They're right there. That was 10 years ago, and I thought they were crazy. But now I'm seeing more and more industries and companies do that, which means if you've already got it in your community, that's a cost you can save them, which means you're probably going to win. Because they're going to do it either way, but if you can save them that cost, you're probably going to win. And I think that's why you're seeing these economic development boards literally building it themselves.
Well, it's the same it's the same investment structure for all the other incentives and things that we do to attract and retain businesses, maintain industry. It's just extending it to another element of that, what we've already agreed upon is essential infrastructure. And I think sometimes economic developers, leaders, other even community leaders are sometimes on the sideline because they lack that confidence on even where to start or what to do. And we'll talk a little bit towards the end on some more practical approaches. But I think we're highlighting and seeing already, you've shared a number of examples of different ways that community and more specifically economic development can play a role. The first example I have, and I know you've got a couple as well here, is actually the one on the right, the North Carolina RFP. And this is an example, a community we're working with in Western North Carolina. Actually, the County Economic Development Group is leading the charge. And what they got to in doing the work and talking to prospective providers is that, let alone the shaky foundation of ongoing operations, the simple capital investment required to even set up a space is too big of a leap for many. And so the county, we're working with this particular community. They're basically taking an older building that was at one time a child care center. They're updating, refurbishing it. They are going to own and hold that property, take that burden of occupancy off, and then RFP, request for proposal, a more competitive operator opportunity, meaning their incentives as the county is purchasing the property and the building, refurbishing it, maintaining it. And I think that's a little bit of what you're highlighting is there are a lot of different ways that we can find our position, excuse me, wherever role we play in this overall equation. You shared a few others that you've experienced and seen, and I think at a broad level provide, again, some more ways in which we can focus some energy on what might be right in our community. Talk a little bit about that broader incubator model, whether physical or virtual through delivery of community members like chamber members and others. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean that you're seeing out in some of these communities as one way folks are getting
Sure.
involved?
Yeah, so I think most of your listeners today are economic development professionals or tied to it some way. So they will be familiar with small business incubators. So if you just think back over the last 20 or 30 years, many communities have set up small business incubators designed to help entrepreneurs get started. There'll be shared services, shared receptionists, shared copying machine, shared internet, and so forth. And over time, you have seen some communities take that and make it a tech incubator or something else. I am seeing communities make childcare facility incubators where they're trying to incubate local talent who are interested in being entrepreneurs and incubate them into a full-fledged childcare business. A lot of Massachusetts and New England towns are doing it. We're not real strong up there. We have had a few clients in Maine, but that's the one region we have done a whole lot of work other than Maine. Uh, but everywhere else we have Nebraska. I saw a Nebraska town do it. I saw a Nebraska town that was doing their childcare incubator within their senior living facility because they already had a kitchen, they already had a nurse, So you had these shared services. Were I not talking to a bunch of economic developers, I could spend an hour talking about an incubator, but these people will most likely know what I'm talking about. So if you just want to Google, particularly Massachusetts, Nebraska, I think you will find some examples to where communities are taking the incubation approach. The second thing I saw you had on there were the tax credits in Florida. Florida's done something very. This is the number one issue according to the Florida Chamber in Florida. And so Florida last year passed a tax credit program that does two things, one of which I find very interesting. And I don't think you could do this at the local level. Well, you could, I guess, based on how your taxes are set up. Uh, Florida is giving tax credits not only to the child care facility, they're giving tax credits to the industry or the bank or whatever the business is who has employees using that facility by a certain amount. I think it's $3,000 per employee who has a kid going to the facility, something like that. So they're not only incentivizing the developer and the operator, they're incentivizing the businesses who have employees use it by lowering the businesses' tax liability. So the business is now incentivized to tell their employees to use it, to push people to it, to help them any way they can. So that's something Florida passed last year. It's probably too soon to know if it's helped or not because it literally passed in the 24 session. I don't think it took account till 2025. But if you want to Google that, that can show you, particularly from a statewide level, some ideas. I wasn't smart enough for that one. I'm always thinking about how do we help the actual child care provider. Whereas Florida said, well, we're going to help them, but we're also going to help the people using it to spur more of that. And so those are just some other creative ways you might want to look at to see if you could do it.
And certainly the U.S. Chamber Foundation has put out a lot of data and background on both impact as well as opportunities at the federal level, and not getting into deep tax conversation today. Certainly, there's even federal tax credits for contributing to on or near site care, as well as some of the supporting and ancillary agency services like our friends at Child Care Aware of America and such. Funny enough, Chad, from our conversation last week with Tutris, again, them providing that infrastructure, and a big part of it is connecting all of the moving dollars, right? So as an employer who's looking at this and goes, hey, this is great, but we don't have the infrastructure to deploy this, that's where partners like Tutris come in, helping tie that funding stream and other funding streams, even county level and state level funding streams in a place where we get dollars to where they belong faster and without delay, which also is a contributor, right, to our overall sustainability. I liked your conversation and highlight too of that incubator model. And we think about that sometimes as a physical place. For those who are familiar with an incubator, you start here and then you're gonna grow up and leave the nest, so to speak. In childcare, it can be even more than the physical space, and I'll come back to that in a second. But as Chad highlighted, we have partners in the community that are well suited to be supporters of childcare in an indirect but very beneficial way, right? Maybe you're a bookkeeper by trade and you're willing to serve on the board of the local childcare center and be the quasi bookkeeper. Maybe you have a marketing background. Maybe you have all sorts of backgrounds, as everybody often does. That could be a small contribution for you, but a big impact for those local programs. So I always encourage communities to take stock of your current inventory of skills, take stock of those entities that might be able to, in a small way, provide some support of business side. Certainly our work at Business of Childcare in the last year, really in high drive on childcare house, right? Really a direct answer to what you're highlighting is, what if you could simply create a place, a space, that both the community, the operator, and the to be and everybody else can come together and really more of a turnkey, shovel ready approach, right? Account for all of those things that sometimes our confidence or lack thereof becomes the limiting factor. But I think what we're highlighting here is that there's a lot of opportunities to really position your own competitive advantage. And Chad, maybe I'm saying it simply, but just as we put on our cover sheet or our promo sheet about our community, available housing, available whatever, more and more, we may want to be thinking about how do we highlight how we're helping support that childcare ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I read, I wish I could remember where I read this, but your person who wants to start a child care facility probably has a passion for kids. They may not have any business acumen or education. And so as you're thinking about the incubator, it may be that teaching them that side, how to market, insurance, taxes, and all. Uh, that worked for us. In 2017, Goldman Sachs chose us for something called their 10,000 Small Business Accelerator Program. Prior to that, we were making it. I mean, we weren't going broke or anything. We were making a decent living, but it was just me and my co-founder. We had no employees. This was a small business accelerator. It wasn't an incubator, it was an accelerator. Goldman Sachs' goal was to take 1 million companies and help them double their revenue. So I was pretty business savvy. I got a business degree. I did economic development for 10 years. Not that that made me a business person. I was on the government side, but I'm still looking at financial statements, this, that, that. And then I had successfully run my own business for 3 or 4 years and didn't go broke. Our revenue since we did that is up 4 or 5 times. It helped us that much. And I already had business acumen. So if you just think about your person in your town who may be going to start the child care facility because they're passionate about it, but no business acumen whatsoever, if you can help them, you're going to be on to something. And so I'm a believer in that model. But there are a bunch of them out there you might want to study as you think about what you want to do. But if I had no facility, I didn't want to spend a boatload of money, I would still go that route.
Well, it makes sense. And what you highlight is what we see every day in the field, right? Our child care business advisors working with communities and child care centers, often in distress. When we boil it down, and I did in my most recent article on LinkedIn, the real business challenges facing child care centers. When you look at that list, it's the same business challenges facing any small business. So this incubator, this accelerator, this input of maybe subject matter expertise is impactful not only for all businesses, but even more so for childcare centers, right? Because they're
Uh,
also facing a broken market, right? Meaning the normal course of action when you sell something is market demand drives price. But
yeah,
reality is the real cost of delivery often is muted because again, we've got that affordability challenge that often is our leading kind of headline in community. So a lot of things and factors in there.
yeah, yeah. But I love your idea of getting other people in town to mentor, to help. Again, I go back to personal. Our second year in business, we had a huge November and December. Therefore, I had not paid in enough estimated taxes throughout the year. Because I mean, we made half our money the last 2 months of the year. And I've got a business degree. I'm good with numbers, but I didn't really think about that. And I don't know if we gave ourselves a bonus or went and spent the money or what. But April rolled around, I owed a big tax bill because we got all our money the last quarter. Little stuff like that could put a company under. I mean, as I remember, I mean, we ended up paying some of it on credit cards, this, that, and other. Lesson learned. I always pay plenty now, but these are things that you just don't know until you're an entrepreneur, and you don't want something like that to come along. And your child care facility's got 20 kids in there, and now they got this big bill, and they can't afford this or the other. And so I love your idea of taking local mentors from accounting or marketing or bankers or whoever to help and really understand, the whole, and that's really how the incubators work is providing not only space, but education, access to education.
A
The
big
other
part of
thing,
it,
Jeff,
right?
this is my opinion. You may tell me different. Uh, People say, how do we get in this bind? Uh, when I was growing up, I lived across the road from my grandmother. And when I came home from school or before I went to school, and when I was 3 or 4, my grandmother kept me. That's just what you did. And I'm from a small town. Now I love my folks. I'm going this weekend to see them. I live 4 hours away. My entire staff, one of them grew up in Colorado. She lives in Tennessee. One of them grew up in Kentucky. She lives in Tennessee. One of them grew up in Kentucky. He lives in Florida. None of us live close to our folks. I think the squeeze we got is particularly in your small to mid-sized towns where people used to stay with grandma. A lot of people have moved and they don't live by grandma anymore because of the way the economy has worked out. And so when people just say, how did we get in this fix? I think that's got a lot to do with it, but that's not going to solve itself. I mean, that's not going to straighten itself out. And so that's why we got to solve these problems.
Well, we also realize in many of our small midtown marketplaces, even our smaller neighborhoods, right, within bigger towns, bigger areas, it becomes also that critical mass issue. And sometimes when we're going out as outsiders into something that we see as a critical need, our natural reaction is build a center. But unfortunately, I can give you a long list of centers open in a lot of beautiful communities that are no longer open. The community saddled with the real estate because it's a center. And so I think it's also an important reminder that you don't have to start with the big mega center like we saw in Clarksville, Tennessee, or in some of the others. It might be just creating some actual real incentives, some valuable incentives within the market conditions. And certainly we can think about it. I think the other thing I'd like to highlight for just everybody to think about practical considerations, right? We have different inputs that all of us can have. Our providers, first and foremost, our existing providers can provide a lot of understanding locally of what is the environment we exist in, what are some of our challenges, as well as maybe opportunities with the right input. And when we extend that conversation on either side, right, think about employers, there is a business case. I've worked with too many employer leaders, part of our community work, who say, well, I don't see where my role is. And I'll say, well, where's second shift for you? I saw you got the help one. Oh, we're way short.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And inevitably we can talk about body short, we can talk all about it, but what we get to is what's that outcome? Well, the outcome for that factory owner is they're missing 15 million in margin and profit because 55 slots short on second shift. So their need even can be better defined and aligned where now, as I say to communities and others, give somebody something to buy, meaning we can help alleviate your second shift problem with your contribution that creates space for second shift
yeah.
care. Right. So really getting
Listen,
those needs connected between each other.
I think the labor force size is the biggest crisis facing our country. Um, I can see it when I go on trips. And yes, if you had childcare, there's more humans that you might have. I just tell you, last week I drove to Kansas City from Florida. I live on the beaches of Florida. By the way, there's a terrible thunderstorm going over. I hope you can't hear that. So if you can, I'm sorry. Uh, but anyway, I drove. That's a long drive, but the reason I drove is we got clients all along the way. So I'll stop and see them along my way. I got to Nashville, Tennessee. In the hotel I was checking in, the key reader wasn't working. Hundreds of people trying to check in, they can't check them in. And the staff don't know what to do. Finally, the manager shows up and she says, I'll walk people to their room one at a time and let them in. But until she said that, the other people weren't going to do a thing and have all these people sitting there. Went on towards Kansas City, got to St. Louis and was in a hurry, so ran through a McDonald's. They tell us to go to station number 2. They don't have our hamburger ready. We're in a hurry. We sat there 15 or 20 minutes. Finally, Allie goes in, and here sits our food. Been sitting there the whole time. Nobody thought to bring it out. Go on to Kansas City, check into the hotel, and the water line has had a break. No water, no water in the hotel. People flocking out, leaving. I don't blame the hotel for that, but there was no manager. There was nobody to reassure people. We're so sorry. The city tells us it's to be fixed in 2 hours. Rest assured, in the morning when you wake up, your shower will work. Can we give you a refund? Can we give you a drink to the bar? Can we? Nothing. And I see when I drive a breakdown in the labor force. The McDonald's example really bothers me because I worked at McDonald's in high school. That's how I saved up a little money, and I know how it works. They have a timer that counts you down, and I see a whole labor force breakdown. So when I talk about child care, I don't think of little Johnny, little Jane, because I don't have any kids. I think about the human beings that are sitting on the sideline because they can't get child care, who might be the one that would work at McDonald's to fix that problem. That's how I think about it. And so until AI takes over the world and we have no employees, then I think the towns that solve this are going to have a leg up on everybody else. And I absolutely consider it infrastructure now. I would not have told you that 5 years ago. I would argue you against it. To me, it's infrastructure. It is something we have to think about.
Well, and again, in that last bucket, when we think about the practical approaches for developers, I think there's a lot of efforts that we can recognize and see where well-intentioned communities and others said, hey, we have a $500 startup grant, or
Right.
we have a $2,000 something or another. And again, we found $2,000 sitting on the side of the road. I think all of us would stop by and pick it up, at least after looking around a little bit. But my point in this highlight is that we put together big incentives for manufacturing. We put together big incentives for those retail stores, the chicken store, that, like, I've heard all of them that communities are desiring to have. We put those incentives in place. Even last week, show of hands, the lowest incentive anybody was given for anything was $5,000. And I said, hey, everybody, just so remember, these are businesses too. Whether they're in
Yeah.
somebody's home and somewhat invisible, or the center that we often think about, they all require dollars, significant dollars, because it's not babysitting. They're not just biding time for the evening while you're out on a fun adventure, right? They're really providing all of those pieces. And so thinking about that, how do you set them up? And that's where we say to communities, throw that $5,000 startup incentive. Maybe you align it to equipment, or maybe you align it to something specific, and maybe make it forgivable, but make it something where the woman who I met most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, forget her name, but Western Minnesota, she said, Jeff, I would have started 2 years ago, right? It was kind of a celebration. And she said, but I didn't have the money to buy the things that I knew I needed to even have a representation of a childcare setting. And so I've been saving up. And in many of those examples, if somebody knew they just needed that, they would have made that happen 2 years ago. And so I think that's the other piece worth highlighting too.
I love the idea of maybe multiple banks in town, multiple industries getting together and putting together a line of credit for these child care facilities, because they may have certain times of the year where cash gets low on them. Maybe it's summertime because now, maybe summer's when they need the cash because maybe they have more demand. I don't know, but yeah, if you could just help them tide over, and I would try to give them lower interest loans than the bank's gonna give that they can get on their own, because it's risky, and you may lose the money. But I invest in stuff all the time. I've got some Bitcoin bought. It may go to zero, but it may go to it's investing. You're investing in your community, and if you set it up the right way, even if you lose, you shouldn't lose everything. But I think we got to think outside the box of just here's a $2,000 grant. No, you may be better off with like $100,000 line of credit that they pay back a
Right.
loan at 2% interest, that multiple community leaders pitch into, knowing this solves our problem. Make sure that you believe in the business plan the person, so you don't just hand it to anybody. Maybe you do make it forgivable if they achieve certain goals. I don't know. I think the more creative you can be, the better. But that's what I like about what y'all do, because we're numbers people. We can show you the problem, and I can show you places that are trying to fix it, but I have not studied what is best when it comes to fixing it. That's where I think y'all can come in, and you come into a community and see what's there. I mean, when I was an economic developer, I was in a small town that had a huge community foundation. I mean, 30 or 40 million in their community foundation. If I were there again, this has been 11 years ago, but if I were there right now, I'd probably approach them and say, "Look, can we use some of your community foundation money, 100 or 200,000, to work on this child care problem? Set up a line of credit, this, that, and the other." Instead of just thinking, "Well, I'll just go give somebody $5,000 and hope they make it."
Yeah, what you're highlighting is that more intentional approach, right? It's really the work that, as communities work with you and others to identify their current moment of time and what their variables are, is getting serious about seeing what's the right opportunity, right? And what is the opportunity that's right for those communities. And it's going to be different, even though they may follow a similar framework, it's going to be quite similar. And that's where we help get intentional, right? Hey, we want more childcare is often where we start. And by the end, we're at a place where we need 10 infant slots. We need 20 preschool slots, second shift. Like, we're getting to those, we all will roll our eyes, those SMART goals, right? Things that are actually definable, that somewhere downstream we can see a scoreboard and they're aligned for our size community. I think that's a big part of it. You probably see a little bit of this as well, Chad. And I know we had such a great conversation. We're running quickly towards the end of our time, but I think where my experience been, our team's experience is that we're kind of sometimes coming to this party ill-equipped. We're coming to this as a nonprofit mindset, right? That old adage of, well, they're nonprofit. Well, I said, but they're still running an operation. You don't want to call it a business, that's okay, but it's an operation that has inputs and outputs, and it still has to function conceivably as a business, right? So getting to that place where we're looking at ROI. We're looking at, by doing this, we're opening up that site selector's next visit where they don't just skip on town after lunch, but actually set up and stay for the night, right? Because they're starting to see more of those check boxes on that scorecard. The incentives we've, I think, talked quite a bit about. I think it's, again, a leap for some, but a more natural progression for others, that you're incentivizing everything else to come. Why not consider it childcare? And to your point, land often is, I wouldn't say abundant, certainly a lot more abundant in many of the smaller communities that I'm looking for, housing developments where we've got 6 parcels and we're hoping to attract some families. I go, well, what if we put the child care house in this example right on the corner there? Now you got child care built in, right, for those houses. It's part of the so to speak tour. And I think the big one that often challenges our forward progress is almost that feeling sometimes, again, most often because we lack the confidence or understanding of the regulatory, right? Whether it's local policies around, businesses in homes or districts within neighborhoods that can't have that kind of thing, to HOAs, who are often balancing the overall health of the community or the neighborhood with traffic that inevitably comes. I think that's another place where as we get started in any stage of readiness, we check ourselves to make sure we're coming at this. The dreams and goals don't pay rent and mortgage for providers, right? Having an environment, the conditions are right, and certainly making sure that we're tying and understanding to with childcare as a part of our actual strategy, we get to a place where we get to better outcomes. And I think that's something that you've been highlighting here. I think you also brought up, and I thought it was an interesting point, economic developers also don't have to, with all that said, feel like the lead entity. In many cases, they might be better positioned as the convener, just like they are for many other projects and efforts within a community. Talk a little bit about that. Economic development leading the way often for communities. How can they see themselves as more of a convener maybe on this topic rather than having to put it on their full-time plate that's overflowing already?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I got asked the other day, what's the biggest challenge facing economic developers? And I said, now they got to be a mile wide and an inch deep. They got to know something about everything. Whereas in the old days, it was just recruit me. Yeah, no, I think the economic developers need to frame up the issue by talking about, this is how many people are not in our labor force because of it, which may take a little studying, but you can figure it out. And this is how much tax revenue we're losing because of it. I mean, if I know you got 500 people not in your labor force, and I just figure some percentage that by getting childcare built, you'll add 40%. And now you got 200 people paying in instead of taking out. It doesn't take long to do a calculation of how much tax revenue they're going to pay in, both income tax and retail sales tax. And you can quickly see whether you made money or not. And we're good at all that. We can do that in our heartbeat. So what I would probably do is state the case in numbers, and then yes, convene my educational partners, my banks, my large industries, and so on and so forth, my nonprofit foundations, and say, here's the issue, here's how it'll make us money. And then I'd probably start attacking it from the facility side, the cash side. Again, just general business. Cash is what puts all businesses out. When a tornado comes, the government typically, and this fools a lot of people with FEMA. Unfortunately, I lived through Katrina in New Orleans and Mississippi. So FEMA generally don't just give you a bunch of free money. Those are loans. They have economic loans. And when a tornado or a hurricane hits, they'll give you a loan as a business, and you may not have to pay it back for 24 months. They may defer payment for 24 months. To me, childcare is an emergency. I'm just telling you it is. So you may want to come up with something like that and use the FEMA Economic Development Disaster Loans as a model. I would approach every existing provider I had to see what I could do to help them survive or expand. But if I had zero altogether, yes, I would do the incubator facility, but I would provide some incentive and some mechanism of cash, just because if somebody's never run a business, that may end up knocking them out, and you don't want them to be knocked out. I mean, for us, every January and February is slow. We know that now. We've been doing this 11 years because over Christmas, people quit, boards quit meeting. They quit, they forget to send you your check. So what do we do now? We have a conference in February that makes up for it. But we had to learn that 11 years later. What you don't want is for your child care person to not be business savvy, not enough experience, and in a year or two they're out because they just didn't know how to budget or whatever. And so if you can provide some cash like those economic disaster loans to help tide them through, I think that's one thing to do too. But I would start with my existing providers and see, is there anything we can do to help you expand or survive? And the last thing I would say, I know we're running out of time. Most communities we've done these studies in, and we've done them from Iowa to North Dakota to Georgia. I'm going to say the average size town's 30,000. I may be off a little. I just want to give you a sense of what we're seeing. In most 30,000 person towns that we've done these studies in, they are anywhere from 500 to 1,000 seats short, based on our simple calculations. They are not within shouting that they are not, oh, I'm 10 short. So like Clarksville, Tennessee, when you saw they added 800 seats, I would argue that's not enough. I'm just saying that so people get the scale of the problem. It is not a 15-seat problem in most towns. Again, I don't know what size towns your listeners are in, but in most towns, and we have similar size clients to you, it's between 500 and 1,000.
Yeah, big gaps, big gaps. And even if you take it up to that high level view, every child care slot often represents the opportunity for an adult to go to work. And so even if you don't want to get into all the base core bottom line statistics, $40,000 wage earned has got about a 1.4 multiplier, right? In Main Street spending, on housing, on all of the things that make our community and all of its pieces be what it is. Chad, this has been a great conversation. I think amongst all of them, right there at the top with the rest, as far as a good, engaging kind of introduction and maybe even reminder or confirmation for some in our audience. There is a direct connection to economic development, to community well-being, that's based in childcare, and those communities that are making that shift and incorporating that as a theme are starting to see the wins of success. Certainly, as a wrap up for our session today, one thing that you can start tomorrow is a conversation. Right? Start thinking about, to Chad's point earlier, maybe you've got that emerging industrial park. Maybe you have the business area of town that you've carved out, whatever it might be, even housing. Start to take a moment and do a quick inventory match. Do we have the appropriate childcare to support what it is we hope is going to accomplish? And then just as part of our normal whole community approach, the same advice Chad would give you: bring the team together that's going to benefit. When you can get those beneficiaries at the table early on, they can start to be a part of and engage. When you get to a place when we've got the proverbial ask, much easier to get that buy-in, because at the end of the day, they've been a part of that visioning. They see their own outcomes as part of maybe those broader outcomes, and it certainly is a much better, stronger way, as we talked about, to get going. So initiating that first conversation, starting to bring the whole community together, and depending on what stage of readiness you are, Chad and his team and the whole group at the next move in our team of Business of Childcare, ready to help meet you where you're at. And often that starts with a conversation, an understanding of the challenge or opportunity that brings us together. And we encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity if your community has an opportunity forward for childcare. About a minute left, Chad. A last parting thought
Yeah.
or
So
thought for people?
I'd like to conclude with two things. One, yes. So what we can do at Next Move Group is tell you how many seats you're short, both full time and after school. And with all our we've had over 1,000 customers in 11 years. So we try to price ourselves low enough to where small to mid-sized towns can afford it without making everybody in town mad by spending all this money on consultants. So I promise you it'll be less than you think. But secondly, what I want to tell people, we have an event in New Orleans in February. I believe it's the 11th and 12th next year. You can go to our website, nextmovegroup.com. It's a 2-day conference. Jeff is speaking at it. We're going to have a whole session on childcare. We're going to have a whole session on housing, in addition to 8 site selectors, 4 of which are in the Site Selectors Guild. And so historically, it's always been site selection. How do you know, but this year we're adding all the child care piece to it. So any of your visitors, I would welcome them. Go to nextmovegroup.com and you can see all of our speakers. We're still announcing more. Today we're announcing the University of Tennessee sending 4 people to talk about what all University of Tennessee is doing in research. And so anyway, we'd love to have you. So go to nextmovegroup.com to see it.
A lot of great resources on their website, lots of great information out there. Chad, a nationally known expert on this, a long and a sustained following. So excited, Chad, to have you joining us today, sharing an insight, a peek into that front end for communities to consider around economic development. For everybody joining us, you'll find our live session available on our website and on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to share it with other community leaders in economic development, folks who are looking for that edge. Chad, thanks again, and everybody have a great day.